the sense that this is a one and done somehow, that you can get in there, pick up WCAG, see how your site is doing, make a few fixes, and then move on and stop paying attention. That just is not going to work.
Hey everyone, welcome to the HearSay podcast. I'm your host, Mike Paciello, Chief Accessibility Officer at AudioEye. Today, like every week, it seems every podcast that we do, I'm really excited to be joined by an old friend of mine. And when I say old, I mean going back many years. Janina Sajka is with us today. She is one of those icons in the industry. She's got a really impressive career, devoted to accessibility, devoted to emerging technologies. Literally from her first position as a project manager at WID, the World Institute of Disability, to her contributions to W3C, where she still works and volunteers a lot of her time today, Amazon, the American Foundation for the Blind, etc. She's also an accessibility independent consultant at her own company called Sajka Associates, where she's helped brands like T-Mobile, LG Electronics, and the Linux Foundation enhance their accessibility architectures and value propositions. So, Janina, welcome to the show, and it's really great to see you again.
Mike, it's delightful to be on your show. Thank you for the invitation. I'm really looking forward to our chat.
You know, I touched on your background just a little bit, but I think it would be great for the audience to kind of get, a little bit more background. Just give us your, 30,000 foot elevator pitch, so to speak, and let us know how you got into this business. What inspired you to get into accessibility?
Yeah, well, I never planned to get into this business, actually. It was never on my radar. I thought I was on the way to Carnegie Hall, but a funny thing happened on the way. I was working in electronic music composition at San Francisco State, and all of that was wonderful as long as we were doing analog synthesis and we had cables and we would throw switches and we would turn potentiometer knobs. And then all of a sudden somebody brought a computer and says, "Oh, look what this wonderful stuff that we can do. Let's get Janina on this." And of course, it was an inaccessible software environment. And oh, now what? So the original thought is, all right, Janina, learn to program and you'll solve your problems and we'll be back and we'll keep making music. Well, I still make music, though not quite like that. And meanwhile, all of that computer detour turned into a career. Started getting very involved as why is this software being written inaccessibly? Why is all of this content so inaccessible? And the only good answer I could come up with is it wasn't on anybody's to-do list to make sure that accessibility was covered. That seemed like a policy issue. That wasn't really a technology challenge. It was a commitment challenge. And that got me involved. WID hired me basically to do advocacy and consumer education, and things went on from there.
I'm intrigued by one thing, and I just want to make sure our audience knows. When you talk about music in your background, let's make sure we put it right out there. You, to this day, are still a concert pianist. Is that right?
That is me. That is true. Yes, I just played a program here in New York City at St. Bartholomew's Episcopal Church. I played Schubert, Beethoven, and Mozart in
I
that
am
order.
colorly impressed on that. I just have always had an affinity for pianos and music, and I think in the background I kind of knew this, but when we talked a few weeks ago, it's like, wow, I totally forgot about Janina being a concert pianist. So that's awesome. Um, well, again, a lot of your work over the years has been involved with the web, as my career as well, web and web accessibility. I mean,
Yes.
we've clearly had other paths and documents and other electronic platforms, but your involvement in the W3C goes back to when, and tell us a little bit about what's happened over these last, 25, 30 years.
Yeah, it really does go back about to the time that the W3C first got involved in web accessibility. Um, when the way was created, which Mike, I believe you had a lot to do with the Web Accessibility Initiative, WAI, WAI. I stayed kind of involved peripherally at first. I thought I was too busy with my AFB responsibilities to get too deeply involved myself. In the first few years, I sent staff there. I had several staff that I could assign for some of the committee work. So I was aware of the way the original format was set up and the wide range of different technologies that Way was going to address. As you know, Mike, Way kind of breaks down into two main focuses. First of all, there's the one that everybody knows, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which is here's how we know how to make the web accessible. Here's what we know. I got involved with the group that was looking at the new technologies, which might not be ones we knew what to do for accessibility yet. And I stayed involved with that and continue to be involved with that. It's now called the Accessible Platform Architectures Working Group, where our horizontal review responsibility is to look at every W3C sec and see if we have any concerns on behalf of accessibility. If so, to negotiate with the group to get those concerns addressed. But we literally have a checkbox before any specification is published by W3C. We check the box for accessibility. Other groups in W3C have similar responsibilities for other areas of social responsibility that W3C cares about, specifically internationalization, security, privacy, and ours is the checkbox for
Yeah, I
accessibility.
love that whole horizontal approach because in theory, it ensures that everything that touches the web is covered in one way or another, where accessibility is concerned,
Yeah,
right?
well, we try to cover it. Sometimes we don't know what to do, and sometimes it takes us a while to get things done, but at least we have to tick the
Yeah, but
box.
that's okay because a part of the
Hmm?
APA, and correct me if I'm wrong, there's a research component to that, right? So,
Yes, there absolutely is.
how does that work within APA, the research component side of it?
There was initially in the early days, there was actually a separate working group for research that would do documents. And when we had a major reorganization of some of the activity in W3C Way, almost 10 years ago now, I think it was 2015, they moved the research functionality into APA because Judy suggested, well, if you're looking at future technologies, you might want to know what things we can do, what we need to do. That might be relevant. Doesn't this make sense? And I thought it did make sense, and it's been a very useful task force to have under APA. We've actually published quite a few accessibility user requirements documents. This all started when we were working on
Right.
HTML5, which was a kind of a difficult slog, HTML5. So much of what we thought was settled art was re-litigated, reimagined, and eventually came back to more or less the same
Hmm.
solutions, somewhat
Yeah,
updated.
yeah.
Yeah.
It is kind of interesting though. I have always appreciated the ways approach Judy's leadership at that level. Um, but I wonder, do you see two things? Questions I have in my mind. Number one is um, what organizations as a whole, businesses, government, whatever they are, for profit, nonprofit, what are the kind of misconceptions that they have about accessibility that you've seen? And maybe there's been some sort of maturity to them. So we used to see these things; they've gone away, but now we're dealing with these new things.
I love that you mentioned maturity because I think the biggest gap is the sense that this is a one and done somehow, that you can get in there, pick up WCAG, see how your site is doing, make a few fixes, and then move on and stop paying attention. That just is not going to work. Because you're continually changing your web interfaces, your user experience online, what you publish, you have to continue to re-examine the accessibility implications of everything you're trying to do. If you weren't changing anything, then yes, maybe you could do once and done, but nobody's going to not change things. That's just not life. It's not like that. Uh, and for just that reason, it's important to have accessibility reevaluated every time something new shows up on the website. And actually, to help with that process, we are very close to concluding a note on accessibility support in a maturity model that would help organizations track the things that they do on the web and actually directly for individuals, because that's going to be a web interface. So we have a maturity model document in preparation that should get published 1.0 here fairly early in
Yeah, I'm
2025.
looking forward to that. Now, that maturity model, I would imagine, primarily addresses the technical side of a of an organization's accessibility maturity model, right? Because an AMM, as I understand it, is top down, and then horizontal, like we talked about. It captures everything, breadth and width of an organization. But where the W3C is coming from is more of a technical web app, mobile, that kind of environment. Am I wrong, or is that
Yes.
right?
No, you're not wrong. You're very much on the nose. W3C, we're always revising, we're always updating, we're always looking for what else we can provide very specific guidance on, or technologies to achieve something that we have not previously achieved. So we're always kind of on that edge a little bit, looking forward. Maturity model is designed for an organization to say, all right, here's what we've done. Here's where we see weaknesses. Here's the plans that we put together. Here's who's working on it. And then over time, you document this as you go. So over time, you know how you've been doing. What progress have you made in the past 6 months, in the last 3 years,
Right.
whatever. Over time, um, it's the prototypes. We've had several organizations actually work with the prototypes, and it's been, if I may say so, eye-opening for all of them. Even organizations whose primary remit is accessibility have discovered gaps by applying the maturity model. So we're very excited that it's going to be a useful tool for that kind of very important over time tracking of how an organization is doing and where maybe more attention is needed.
So Janina, yeah, there's no doubt in my mind that organizations on the technical side need to give some real thorough thought to maturity models, especially in their engineering life cycles. And I can
Mm.
remember, as I'm sure you can, I mean, when I first started using web, I'm embarrassed to say this, the internet, everything was text, right? And then,
Yes.
the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign came out, and Mosaic came out, and now we've got the notion of a
Yep.
GUI on the web. And now we've moved forward. Now we're in the web. We're doing web apps. We've got all these things. But can we say that what is coming out of the Web Accessibility Initiative, what is coming out of the W3C, is applicable to digital society as a whole, not just web?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Increasingly, you need to interact with the web just to live in the world. If you don't, um, I don't know what kind of life one would be having without uh, some kind of online
Right.
activity, and not just for entertainment or socialization, but also interacting with governmental agencies, doing research, looking for things that you might need in your home, in your work life. All of that is web based. Applying for a job is going to be a web form somewhere. Uh, it's going to be a presence. It's going to be an electronic submission. Everything we do anymore is web
You
based.
know, it
So
makes me think, and again, I remember Tim making this point in conversations that we had. I'm talking about Tim Berners-Lee. He wanted the web not to be a US thing. And that was one of the early concerns that we had. This needed to be have international, universal applications, so to speak. And you can see how that's even more true today because there's a number of different mandates out there, the EAA, the ADA, what's going on, the Ontario Accessibility Act, Australia's got theirs, all of these different acts. The reality is what we need is a universal accessibility act that just applies across the board to digital society. Would you agree?
I would very much agree. We don't have the governmental entity to do that. I suppose the UN comes closest, and uh, the UN does have accessibility based into its long-term development
Yeah.
plans. That they tend to plan in 20, 25-year cycles. Now, what comes out of that doesn't really have the force of law like U.S. government Section 508 or
Right.
the EU's 314. I never get those numbers right. Uh,
Yeah.
but you named several of them, Mike, and they're slightly different, but those are the entities that have enforcement ability to put things into regulations and require society to do
Yeah.
things. Getting them synchronized is
Yeah.
tricky because the industry needs consistency across the
Right.
board. It doesn't help anyone for the EU to be a little bit different from the US, to be a little different from Australia or Japan or Canada or any of the players. China, for instance, who is increasingly paying
Right.
attention. We need a consistent set of standards and requirements, and that is
Yeah.
W3C. There is nobody else who's doing
I
that.
think one of the popular expressions right now in, in the development world, especially around data, is a single source of truth. And that's what we kind of need. We need to have that single source of truth where accessibility, where digital society, relies upon, and we can make things that are, again, not just accessible, because I've never really liked that mantra that we've, I guess we're at fault. Some of us early on, we always talk about accessibility, but the reality is it needs to be accessible and it needs to be usable, right? And
It needs that. Then they're not the
they're
same
not.
thing.
They're not.
I have a horrible example of fully accessible and not very usable. If you try to buy a treasury bond from the US Treasury, you can do that and just go in there and spend up to $10,000. Well, they want you to open an account, and the only way to put in a password is to type on their on-screen
Right.
QWERTY. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and you have to if you tab through, it's gonna there's no up and down arrow. You're gonna go QWERTY and all across the first row before you get to ASDF in the
Right.
second row. There's no
Yeah. Yeah.
way.
So it's just a good example of how usability and accessibility need to be. There's a marriage there that has to happen. There's a union in order to make whatever interface that we're designing and developing. And this, I think, is even more true. Where I wanted to go next was in large organizations, because I think fundamentally this is a big problem within. And you've had large clients. You mentioned Amazon earlier. I don't know what else you could
Mhm.
mention, but what do you see, or where do you see the challenges that lie for them today?
It's complexity. A large organization has a lot of products, has a lot of services, has a lot of whatever they do, and because that means a lot of choices, because that probably means a lot of various ways those choices can be configured and put to use. That introduces more on a web page that gets more and more busy and more difficult to understand where you are and how to interface with. Uh, just adding more is not a solution because it starts to exclude people. Complexity gets in the way. On the other hand, you need all of those options and all of those choices. So, how to navigate a path through that is both the kind of path that a user with accessibility needs can navigate, but is also smart enough to pick up on that and guide you appropriately. That is the challenge. That is the marriage between being really usable as well as accessible.
Yeah, large organizations, as I've seen them, my experience is of course, as you mentioned before, they do rely on standards, because that gives them a foundation for moving forward. This is what everybody else in the world needs. This is how they want it. This is how we have to develop it, right, and design it, right. But there's that. But there's also more around requirements, right, that need to be done. More around object and pattern libraries and design guidelines at that level. These are the kind of things that I think large organizations need to become de facto internal standards, internal processes, so that and then of course develop or design or acquire, however you want to do it, toolkits that allow their devs, their folks, to now build out of the box controls and objects and widgets that go into these emerging platforms, these digital platforms that individuals with disabilities who are trying to log in, so to speak, or connect, where there's some interoperability that's going on. And
Yeah.
that ultimately is the problem, isn't it? It's the interoperability.
You mentioned toolkits. Toolkits is a big problem. You can't just take any toolkit off the shelf and expect that it's going to have accessibility support. You need to make sure that it does, or maybe not purchase it, not put it into use, because then you're going to be retrofitting, and you're retrofitting the toolkit as well as your product portfolio, and that just is arguably more work than you might want to do if there's a more accessible option uh, to choose instead. Uh, why reinvent the wheel? Having accessibility support in toolkits is so key, and so often it's just not there.
Yeah, I don't know. I totally agree with you. I know. Again, here at AudioEye, we've developed and released now a software developers toolkit exactly for that reason. Because even though where our sweet spot is in AI and automation, and automated remediation, the reality is that the control at the design and development level still resides with those developers at the source. So we still have to make sure, ideally, right, in the nexus of accessibility, so to speak, we have designers and developers who are making that code base and those platforms usable and accessible at the source. All we're doing right now is helping them get somewhere faster using AI, using automation, and to scale quicker. But in the
Yes.
background, we're still pushing for getting that source done and done right and done well.
Well, and companies like yours are so important for organizational success on that. A company who should not expect, even a large company is not going to have a lot of accessibility expertise and staff. It's going to be a very, very large company before that begins to happen. There are quite a few who are going to need expert assistance, um, because it's not simple and it's not trivial, and it's so very important. And it, is important from so many perspectives. Not only doing the right thing, but staying away from uh, legal problems. For instance, if you get things wrong where there are regulations, uh, you don't want to do that. You don't want to put yourself there. You want to avoid it by being smart in the first place, and getting the right assistance, building that out, making the right tooling choices is absolutely critical.
Now, you have been working on a document with some colleagues. I've been, involved a little teeny bit in terms of the automation accessibility capabilities document. Can you
Yes,
talk a little bit about that? What
yes.
its purpose is?
Oh,
Thank you.
absolutely. This came kind of by way of addressing overlays a couple of years ago, which were so disliked among accessibility professionals, sometimes with very good reason. But it's not because intrinsically the technology can't deliver. It's because we had too many examples of poor implementation, and the knee jerk response became, don't do this at all. Don't do anything beyond source to try to remediate and make an experience of a web presence more accessible, because you need to do it at source. Source is the only place to be making accessibility accommodations. And that was never the way
Right.
vision. In the early days, it became kind of de facto situation over time. But in the early days, we expected that we would have accommodations in source. We expected that over time those would become less useful and we would need repair and remediation. And we expected that we needed user agents that were smart enough to do some of this for users themselves directly. Some of that was arguably a little bit naive. The notion that a user could build their own CSS style
Right.
sheet, uh, was probably a little naive, but the idea is correct. We do need users to be able to transform a website into something that works better for them, whether it's contrast or different fonts or whatever the particular accommodations are. That should persist site to site. We haven't quite worked that out. We have begun to do post source, sometimes quite effectively, Uh, but we haven't figured out how to make it persist yet across sites, and I do think that that's kind of a horizon
Yeah.
for us. You mentioned a document, and you know, I kind of went on that detour to say, yes, this was part of our vision once upon a time that we would have uh, accommodations being built in source, but then for one reason or another that we might want to do that after the original source, post source, as we're calling it in this document, or at the edge, as is sometimes also called, whether it's overlays or some other kind of JavaScripted remediations, CSS transformations, whatever, make that available to users is just effective if it's done well. It's good.
I'm good. I want to say technology because that's all you and I work at, right? This is a other than other
Yeah.
than your concert pianist, which I can't compete with, but on the technology side of this, you're 100% right. I don't understand. I've been challenged by, and I say this more on an internal exercise challenge, by the concept. Look, technology, like everything else, was made to mature. I mean, we were just talking about organizational maturity a little while
Right.
ago, right? And we all appreciate that
Yes.
organizations, by and large, today have a whole, there's a long way to go before they reach, this optimal organizational environment that takes in the needs of users with disabilities, people with disabilities, and other areas as well. Fundamentally, the same thing is true about technology. You and I both know part of the problem was, like everything else, like every product I think I've ever seen, at least in my lifetime, um, the marketing and the PR, and sales is always a little more than it actually is. It's better than it is than reality, right? And we just have to learn
Yeah.
more about how to be truthful and honest. I talk a lot about trust
Yes.
marketing, um, and then still work on the solution because as it stands right now, Janina, and you're a prolific AT user, screen reader user, right? And an
Yeah.
expert at that level, which I'm a user, but not an expert, but it's just imagination. But this issue of interoperability is still there. The concept
Yes.
of whatever we want to call it, if you want to call it an overlay, a layer of technology, some sort of layer of technology that becomes this kind of personalized interpreter for us or renderer, for a person with
Yeah.
disability. The ideal, the panacea really is that that interface adapts to me as a user, whatever my needs are, under whatever constraints I have, whether they are personal, literally in terms of, a blind, low vision, mobility, what have you, technology, or if it's just I happen to be in a noisy environment in an airport and I can't hear what that person's saying, so give me
Yes.
captioning.
Right, right. And it should be across all of the different devices we use, all the as well as all the environments you just mentioned. A noisy environment in an airport, you would rely on perhaps a speech interface a little bit, well, or maybe the visual because it's noisy. Uh, but the point is, that we have all of these abilities, and we need our technology to be cognizant of where we are, what we're using, and to know us well enough that it can, in fact, adapt to the things that matter to us individually as users. Because my set of accommodations as a fully blind screen reader user is just not going to be the same as my co-chair in the Accessible Platform Architectures Working Group. He's a low vision user. He's always looking at screens. He's got different needs. And then the people with cognitive and learning disabilities, they have yet another set of needs. And even if we start getting these very specific, sometimes these can begin to compete with one another. That should not be a problem, and it doesn't need to be a problem. I think it may take somebody brokering a service, whether it's for a fee or by selling advertising or whatever, to where you make a trust
Yeah.
relationship with somebody that does transforms for you and knows about you and knows your, it's gonna have to be a trusted situation because they can know a lot about you, and we probably don't want that sold to just anybody who comes along. There's probably a bit too much on the web right now as it is.
I totally agree. I totally agree. You know, you probably don't remember. I wrote about this very thing back in my book 2000,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And I dialed it up as pervasive accessibility, but there are a whole lot of things that have to take place. One of those is exactly what you said, and I mentioned that. I'm thinking literally back to that
Mhm.
chapter that I wrote on this notion of handoff, and that's what will make interoperability easier. And I remember being at CSUN. This is the Cal State University at Northridge AT conference that takes place every year, coming up in
Yep.
March in Anaheim this year. But I remember giving a talk there and doing a survey when we were just really starting to touch the surface, the surface rather, of would I, as an AT user, if inquired by a web environment, an application environment, whether or not I was a screen magnifier, screen reader, keyboard centric user, whether or not I would be willing under, a secure token type environment. I think that's really what we're talking about. That
That's
would
a
I
key.
give that information to that interface so that it could then turn on everything that needed to be turned on to make sure that application environment or that web environment, because it was more static back then than it was dynamic even. Um, could I do that? And here we are today. We're still wrestling with the same problem.
We're still wrestling with that, but I think it has a future because I don't think it's just a disability concern. It's a little bigger than that. It's helping your parents who are aging. It's helping kids who aren't quite yet sophisticated. So there's surrogacy involved. There's the expertise where you're kind of good with technology, but you don't have the chops in a particular area. So you allow somebody to log into your system and make the tweaks for yourself. Microsoft, Apple, Google, they're all doing that already. We can generalize that. Somebody gets trusted with my money. I don't keep it in a mattress. I keep it in a
Yeah,
bank, and I can have access to it wherever I go on the planet. That's wonderful. We need to do the same for our various devices and the various websites that we
boy,
visit, whether I'm on a small screen iPhone, on the big desktop computer, or projecting to monitors, huge ones in the living room. That needs to not matter. It needs to know about me specifically, people with me, and it needs to adapt as I move around in the world. And that's doable. We just haven't filled in all of those
it's just
gaps
not
yet.
mature. That's all. It's like everything. It's not mature.
Right. It's just not
Yeah. So
mature.
you just brought up two things that I really want to capture, and then we'll go into our AI discussion, so to speak. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
One was in boy, am I glad you emphasized this because this is the fundamental truth. What we're trying to do through this kind of personalization, outreach through the overlay notion, it's less about trying to mimic or emulate an AT because we really can't, right? AT, you're really just not going to
No.
get ATs are by and large mature, right? Those are mature
Yes, they are very
technologies, and they're
mature.
they're
Yes.
they're very much relied on by people with disabilities. So those overlays are less useful for them as opposed to individuals, as you just mentioned, the elderly, who don't know a fig about how to set their browser or write
Mm-hmm.
style sheets that do things for them. But boy, if you put up a button in front of them and says, "Here, this will make your font, the text on your screen larger," they're all good on that, right? Because
Yeah,
that's
they're very good
right
on
there.
that.
The same
Yes.
thing is true about I tend to call them novice users, but that's where I like that second thing that you brought in, the notion of a surrogate, a surrogacy environment, right?
Yes.
So individuals who may not be technically have the wherewithal to do some of these changes that are right there for them in the browser or at the OS level, right, on their platform. So they need some uh, um, context sensitive help. You know,
They need context sensitive help. They may need a human. They may need an AI bot.
right,
It depends on how repetitive, once it's set up, they can probably do it well. I know some very brilliant people in our cognitive and learning disabilities task force that have problem with dual factor authentication, these strings of six and with the social security,
right.
six wasn't enough for them, eight digits. Well, they can't remember them. They don't do them fast enough. They have trouble logging into their accounts because of
Yeah,
that. That's a kind of surrogacy support that is sometimes needed for some people. Some of the rest of us are fine
yeah.
with those. If we can get them in accessible form, we can put them in the form, and we're done with dual factor and we move on. And of course, we've gone into biometrics as well there, but some people don't do so well
Yep.
with those, and sometimes certain amount of assistance is
No doubt
needed.
about it. I think this is why one of the reasons why applications like Be My Eyes are starting to become very popular because you've got this notion of kind of a context sensitive help on your shoulder. You've got someone there that's helping you visually in this
Yes.
case, and so that's becoming very popular now. Microsoft has integrated AI into it.
Seeing AI, same
Exactly.
idea.
So
Yep. And
so so that's a good bridge to
or an agent on demand through IRA, same
right.
general idea, but you talk to a human.
Exactly.
They'll make sure if you need a copy of that document that you've
Right.
got it well focused, you've got optimal resolution in the JPEG that you store. That's really
Yeah. Yeah.
lovely. That's that's worth the few
I
bucks a month
isn't
for
that what we're
that.
all about too? Isn't accessibility really about
Well, that is what we're all and I let me tell you, I'm jazzed about built-in AI for image descriptions. I have been worried for quite a long time, go online shopping, that it's image after image after image after image, and I go, "Where's my text
right.
description?" It's not
No,
there.
no.
Do I know what I'm buying? Is it what I want? Is this, refill for the liquid hand soap, is it gonna come in a plastic bag or a plastic bottle? What tells me that? Well, the
Yep.
AI will.
Yeah.
And I'm jazzed because, the company's not gonna put that amount of data in. They might do it today, but it'll atrophy over time, and there'll be less and less of it because it's so much easier to put up a graphic of the thing you're
Yep.
buying. So I'm looking forward to AI telling me what that
Would
is.
you agree, Janina? It's not just AI as it gets better. To me, it's still machine learning. Most of what I see out there is still more along the lines of
Yes.
machine learning, but it's AI and it's automation. All of those things have to be combined together to make it work and give us an ideal environment that works and works well for a person with a disability. Because, hey, here's a very simple thing, right? So, all text on an image. So now you do image recognition using AI and you
Mhm.
write an alt text string, right? Well, what's the now you would know
Yes.
this better than I do. I want to say, what's the character limit on alt text? Is it two?
Oh, we could never get a definition for that. We tried in HTML5, and, they would not commit to a character
Okay,
limit,
so that was my next question. So where's the cutoff? Well, how do you? So this is not an alt text. It's too long. It becomes a long desk. Is this literally
right?
just a subjective decision?
That's the where it was
Wow.
left. I tried to get it specified. I tried to get, I tried when we were building
Yep.
HTML5, um, and for whatever reasons, primarily of internationalization and the concern that putting a character limit would not translate well into other language environments, we kind of came up with general advice that the alt, which you hear every time, it needs to be relatively short, whereas the description, which you may ask for, could be very
Yeah.
long,
Yeah. No
actually.
doubt about it. And there's just so many use cases I can think for both. So that's another discussion for another day. Um, I want to
Mhm.
switch topics here just a little bit because I want to capture something. Yanina, again, you and myself, we've been, accessibility professionals for some, this is my 40th year in
A
that.
few
Yeah,
decades, let's put it that
exactly.
way.
What advice do you have for individuals, young people, students in school, universities, pursuing a career in this area? Because we really do need more folks. The next generation
We
couldn't come
do.
fast enough.
No, and I'm very excited. We're seeing younger people sign up for our standards activities in W3C, and I'm really, really thrilled by that. I'm happy to tell them, all of these little pitfalls that no, we haven't solved them in the last 30 years. We need to still work on them, but here's what we've tried before, and here's how that didn't work out, and let's find a better way with your help to move that forward.
Yeah,
I I'm really happy to talk to younger people that are looking for careers in IT, that accessibility is a place that you will always feel good about. Um,
yeah. No, I totally agree.
This is a work you can, it's not just selling more insurance
Right.
policies. It's actually making it possible for people to do things for which they don't have other good alternatives in life.
So there's no doubt that there are a lot of organizations out there that can help individuals who are seeking careers in the accessibility profession. Universities are starting to adopt this into the computer science programs. There's an
Yes, they
opportunity.
are.
I was just putting in a plug for Cal State because I was just out there just a couple of weeks ago with some folks there, and so their director of their CS program is integrating, this into the CS curriculum that they have there. So it's out there. We want to encourage professionals to seek out individuals like Janina and many others that we've had on the HearSay program, this podcast, because it is a career. It is a career now that is mature, but we need we need a new generation of folks. I'm getting too old to do this.
Yes, exactly. And I thought of years ago, I thought we'll do this, we'll be
Yeah,
done, and I'll find something else to do in life. Well, it's not going to
yeah,
be done. There is going to be more work to do because I don't think we'll ever quite get to that perfect world, but we will get closer. We will make it more nearly ideal, more nearly perfect. And, we'll make it more nearly so yet again. I'm thinking of people that we have yet to bring onto the web, some of the exciting new work we're doing in APA. I mentioned horizontal review. There's the other aspect of what we do there. When we find a gap, we look to see if we can possibly
yeah.
fill it. And we think we're on a path to filling AAC symbol users, augmentative and
Awesome,
alternative communications. Yep,
awesome.
they've never been in the
No,
web because they don't speak the
yeah,
same
yeah. Oh,
language.
that's awesome. I'm going down to ATIA at the end of January, so hopefully I'll catch up with something there. So you mentioned
Yes.
we're going into the new year. You need to, open up your crystal ball there, so to speak. What do you see as the next generation of digital trends for accessibility?
Well, I think we've got some low-hanging fruit that we're breaking through on. I just mentioned symbol support. We have agreement in principle from the Apples and the Googles, the browsers of the world to incorporate that. We're only arguing at this point about the
Okay.
mechanisms. Unicode versus an independent registry, why one or the other, and under what circumstances. Details. We're dotting the I's, we're crossing the T's. It's going to happen. Don't know how well it'll work. We'll see, because again, they don't speak the same language. So there's going to be a certain amount of translation from one symbol set to another, but we'll have the opportunity to add AAC symbols to web content. And we think that the uptake on that will be pretty much procedurals, kind of signposts
Yep.
initially, not a lot of detail initially, but even a little bit of signposting can be really useful. The low hanging fruit is I think we're going to lock in some very common tasks that we do online, like login, like find the contact page, like
Hmm.
help, and context specific help, accessibility statement. I think we're going to lock that into predictable destinations at a web location so that you can discover what's available on this particular site by way of standard destinations, that you can support people with cognitive needs who need everything else grayed out in order to be able to focus on it. That's kind of how we got to it, but I think everybody's going to benefit in a defined location for
Yeah.
login. Is it two words? Is it one? Is it sign in or log in? Is it log
Right.
on? Why the variation? It's the
Yeah.
same task, and it should be as predictable as who cares what the
Yeah.
words are.
Given
Uh,
that the largest population of individuals with disabilities worldwide are those with cognition disabilities, this is really a
yes,
critical
absolutely,
critical
very much
goal, and
so.
I'm really glad to see that you're tackling that. That's awesome. Anything else?
Personalization grows out of all of
Perfect.
that. That's the big
Yeah.
holy grail. I think we're going to do more. I think we're going to do more with edge technologies. I do think we will move toward brokered trust services. I know Tim Berners-Lee is working on a way to not require a third party. I'm not sure I know enough about it to know how he plans to cover people's various devices over all the sites they visit. Whether their own trust brokers somewhere in the cloud and proxy through that. I've always thought that it would be a third party who would have the additional
Hmm.
expertise to help configure what the user needs and then to apply it across all the various sites that that user is going to go to, and be made aware of situations when the user is having difficulty. So, because AI can help with that. User that has been 10% of the time has been blocked in this kind of activity, maybe when someone should look at it. I do think we're going to make good progress in personalization over the next 3-5 years, and I'm very excited to be looking at the technologies that I think are going to help with
That's
that.
awesome. That's fantastic. So, Janina, thank you so much for taking some time to be with me today here on the HearSay podcast. It's just wonderful having these conversations. I know you and I could go on for hours and hours without end in these conversations. But again, I want to just thank you for being here on the program, and wish you best in the days going forward.
Thanks, Mike. My great pleasure. Thanks again for the opportunity.
HearSay is produced by Sojin Rank, Mike Barton, Mariella, Paulino, and Missy Jensen. Edited by Alex Dorrier. If you enjoyed this podcast and don't want to miss future episodes, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you next time.